Hi, I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Yarn, and today I'm talking about The Black Phone, or should I say The Black Phone 2, the new sequel to the 2022 Joe Hill adaptation directed by Scott Derrickson, like the first one was. This is a movie that when I first heard about it, I was kind of on the fence. I'm like, does the movie really need a sequel? The first movie kind of wraps up nicely and neatly. And when I heard the angle they were going at, that, well, no, the grabber comes back almost in a Freddy Krueger like fashion. It's his spirit because he's so evil that he returns with like demon powers that involves dreams. I thought this could go either way. This could be really, really cool and fill the void, that we haven't had a Nightmare on Elm Street movie in a very long time. Or it might feel like a cheap imitation and just backfire spectacularly. I'm very happy to say I think it works. And I think that and now having seen the movie, I saw it in an early screening where I got this awesome shirt that I'm gonna wear like everywhere now. After seeing it, I think that not only am I convinced that it works for this, but I'm convinced that this is the better alternative to legacy sequels for Nightmare on Elm Street that would have just messed with that franchise's continuity and sullied Freddy Krueger's image. Well, more than it was already sullied by the fire. But this is the Black Phone 2.
Vengeance is mine.
We pick up several years later. I think the first one was set in 78. This one, I think, is 81. So Finney and Gwen are now a few years older. Finn, very much still reeling from the PTSD of what happened to him in the first movie. That was a hell of an experience that no child should ever have to go through. And, he's finding ways to deal with that trauma. Meanwhile, Gwen starts having these weird dreams like she did before about this winter camp in the Rocky Mountains. Remember, this is set in Colorado. So we've got the Rockies, we've got the, torrential blizzard and snowfall up in that area. And she's convinced that there's something going on up there. The two of them need to investigate, and investigate they do. And what follows is what I like to call a Nightmare on Elm Street meets The Shining, which is funny because this is based on a Joe Hill story. Joe Hill, of course, being the son of Shining author Stephen King. I would hesitate to say that it copies them versus just Derrickson is inspired by them and very much does his own thing. And his own thing is, I mean, I just eat this stuff up. I love the winter setting. I love the snow on the ground. It gives it such a sense of atmosphere. I love Derrickson's super creepy, like 8 millimeter grainy looking. He used it for the dream sequences here. And it harkens back to the first Sinister movie, where those home movies were the creepiest part of the movie. They were the things that people remember most from that movie, which also starred Ethan Hawke, although he was a much more normal person, and I'll get to him in this movie. But he uses that same technique here for the dream sequences, and I don't know what it is about like the grainy look, the 8 millimeter, just something about it is just so creepy and so effective. In a lot of ways, Gwen is much more the protagonist here. Finney is still there. Mason Thames, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He gives a really great performance, but he feels much more in a supporting role. Madeline McGraw absolutely shines. We knew her as the foul-mouthed, abrasive little psychic girl in the first Black Phone movie, and here we see her kind of more coming into her own. We see her reeling with the blessings and the curse that is her psychic gift and ability, and coming to terms with like who she is as a person, coming to terms with how she connects back to her mother. You remember from the first movie, her mother had that same issue. That's the whole reason why her dad kind of came down so hard on her, and disturbingly so, with his belt, insisting that her dreams were just dreams. And I love that this is like a coming of age story. The first one was Finney learning to stand up for himself, learning to not take anything from anybody, whether it was the bully at school or the serial killer. And this movie is Gwen realizing that not all her dreams really are more than just dreams, and that it's not always a curse and she can use it for good. And I really, really like what they do with her character here. I also really like that they give their dad kind of a redemptive arc. I know that at the end of the first movie, he's incredibly remorseful for the, shall we say, lackluster job he's been doing as a single father with, the tragic loss of his wife and the kid's mother. He's still not perfect. I like that he's not perfect though, but he tries. And he references in dialogue that, he's about to get his 3-year sober chip. And even though he's still making mistakes, and like there's literally one scene in particular where I felt the audience almost like yelling at him to do something that he should be doing, but he's trying, and I really respect that, and I think it would have been so easy, for Derrickson to simply make him a one-dimensional, he's the, alcoholic father villain trope. I like that he's more than that. I like that he's three-dimensional, and that he's given a bit more to do in this one than he was in the last one. And we gotta talk about Ethan Hawke. He doesn't have too much screen time. I feel like he was in the first one more just because he's there in person as opposed to he's appearing on the phone and in dreams in this one. But oh my god, does Ethan Hawke steal every scene that he's in? And he manages to be, I don't want to compare him to Freddy Krueger. There is no comparison to Robert Englund's legendary performance over the years as Freddy Krueger. But Ethan Hawke manages to be, I think, creepy in his own way, disturbing in his own way, and just in like the way he talks about like what hell is like, and how you realize this is a guy that, if you thought he was bad in the first movie, any bit of humanity he had in that is just gone. He is just pure evil, and you kind of buy into it because, of course, it's a supernatural movie anyway. And I know a lot of people were, oh, why are they going supernatural with this one? Because he was just a regular human killer in the first one. Here's the thing, the first movie already was supernatural with the ghost kids on the titular black phone. When he, in this supernatural world where these things exist, I can buy that a man, a soul this evil, finds a way to claw itself back from hell itself to seek vengeance. And there's just something so unsettling about it. There's something so creepy about it. And Ethan Hawke is not afraid to just commit 100% to it. And I love him for it. All that being said, there were really only two things about the movie that kind of bugged me. And I say this as like a very minor nitpick. And like overall, I love the movie. It's a solid sequel. I really, really enjoyed it. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention there were two things that kind of annoyed me. And admittedly, it's kind of hard to talk about these two things without spoiling the movie. So I may do a more like spoiler in depth talk about these two things later on. After a lot of you have had the chance to see the movie. All I'll say is this: number one, the rules around the dream, not the most consistent. I know the same thing happened with Nightmare on Elm Street, but I felt like those rules got less consistent movie after movie. The rules of the dream here don't feel the most consistent throughout the movie. Like they kind of establish, you know, A plus B equals C, and that's the rule of our dream. But then over here, A plus B is D in this other scene. And that's my only that. And again, without getting into spoilers, it introduces lore that kind of retcons a little bit about what happened in the first one. I'm not the biggest fan of retcons. I mean, if you watch this channel, you know that I hate retcons. Now, if they're necessary for the plot, if the story truly is better off having that retcon, I think it makes sense. And you can go back to the original and say there's no way they had this in mind when they wrote this scene. Like obviously George Lucas was not intending for Luke and Leia to be brother and sister when he had them making out in Empire Strikes Back. At least I hope he wasn't having that in mind, because if he was, that's really creepy. So I think the same thing happens here, where if I go back and watch the first one now, I'm going to think, yeah, there's no way Scott Derrickson had this thing from the second one in mind during this scene. and it bugs me a little bit. I get why he did it, and I think that it kind of works for this movie. I don't know that it works for the first one. Like I said, if those are my biggest complaints about it, you've got a really good movie. And I think with Black Phone 2, you do have a really, really good movie. It's creepy when it needs to be, it's funny when it needs to be. Gwen very much still has that foul mouth and strings obscenities together in ways that make her sound like a trucker with a thesaurus, but it's also really heartfelt. There's a moment particular that I was almost brought to tears. It remembers the inherent tragedy and humanity that comes with, these stories about murder and ghosts, and the connection we make that, if there is a ghost, it means there's something after death. And if there's a hell, is there a heaven? I read one early review that said it's oddly pro-Christian. I didn't read into that at all. I thought, if anything, because it's a Christian camp they go to. If anything, I feel like this movie is very anti-hypocritical Christian. It's very anti-judgmental Christian, and yes, I agree wholeheartedly. So it's funny when it needs to be, but it's also incredibly heartfelt and will probably bring you to tears. So, Black Phone 2, really, really great sequel. I still like the first one better. I don't think you were ever going to top the first one, but this comes pretty close. I don't know where you go from here. I hope they don't keep milking it. I trust Scott Derrickson not to keep milking it. I don't trust Blumhouse to not keep milking it. So we'll see how it does, at the box office. But hey, these are just my thoughts. These are just my ramblings. This is just my channel. If you don't like it, get your own. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Watch mine. Let me know in the comments, what did you think of Black Phone 2? Have you seen it yet? What did you like about it? How did you think it compared to the original? Did the retcon bother you as much as it bothered me? Please let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Come at me in the comments. It's what YouTube is for. Like, share, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. If you don't, you may end up snowed in at a creepy winter camp in the Rockies of Colorado with nowhere to go and weird 8mm film creepy dreams with Ethan Hawke on skates. And as always, every day is Halloween.